Captain Elias Rain stood at the edge of the rocky plateau, staring at the desolate landscape of Conora. The planet, once home to a thriving alien civilization, now lay in ruins, its once beautiful cities reduced to dust and shattered stone. Conora had been a symbol of greatness, an advanced world with untold knowledge. But that was long ago. The Kagaltha, the planet's people, had vanished after a brutal war with a powerful enemy, leaving behind only the silence of their lost history. Elias and his crew had arrived on a routine exploration mission, but something had drawn him to this place. He couldn't explain it, but there was an odd pull, a feeling that something important awaited him. His sensors had picked up strange readings deep below the surface. The readings led him to a large structure buried beneath the ground. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't something his people had ever seen before. The underground facility was an eerie place. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Elias's boots echoed as he walked through the long, narrow corridors, his flashlight cutting through the dark like a beacon. The walls were covered with alien symbols he couldn't understand, but they didn't seem threatening. Instead, they felt hopeful, as if they were meant to guide someone to something important. After what felt like hours of navigating through the abandoned structure, Elias came to a large chamber. In the center of the room, lying on a stone slab, was a woman. Her skin was a soft, translucent shade of blue, and her long hair shimmered like strands of silver. She was breathing, but only just, weak and barely alive. The sight of her struck Elias in a way he couldn't explain. She looked human, yet she wasn't. She had delicate features, almost ethereal, and her eyes, though barely open, were a brilliant shade of violet. Elias rushed forward, checking her pulse with practiced hands. She was still alive, but barely. He quickly unsealed a small medical kit from his belt and began to assess the situation. She was cold to the touch, her body frail, as though it had been starved of nourishment for a long time. Whoever she was, she had been here for a very long time. The woman stirred, her violet eyes opening slightly. She let out a weak sigh, and with great effort, whispered, "Help me." Elias felt a jolt of surprise. This alien, this creature from another world, was speaking to him, pleading for his help. He immediately activated his communicator, calling for backup, but the signal was weak, distorted by the planet's atmosphere. No one would be able to reach him in time. Don't call anyone," the woman said in a voice barely above a whisper. Her hand reached out toward him. Elias, though confused and wary, took her hand. It was warm, despite her body's condition. "You are human?" she asked, her words slurring. Elias nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm Captain Elias Rain. I've come to explore this planet. Who are you? What happened here?" The woman smiled weakly, though it was clear it took all of her strength to do so. "I am Lyra, the last of the Kagaltha." Elias didn't know what to say. He had heard of the Kagaltha, an ancient race of aliens who had once dominated the stars. They were known for their incredible technology and wisdom, but they had disappeared without a trace. To find one of them alive, let alone the last of their kind, was unimaginable. "Your people," Elias began. "They're gone, aren't they? The Kagaltha, there's no sign of them anywhere." Liara nodded weakly, her eyes closing again for a moment. "They are gone, because of a war. A war we could not win. And now, I am the last." Her voice broke slightly, as though the weight of her people's fate was too much to bear. Elias didn't know what to say. He wasn't prepared for this. He had come here to explore, to document, to study a forgotten world. But now, standing before this fragile creature, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. She was the last of her people. She needed help. But what kind of help could he offer? "I need you to listen, Captain Rain," Lyra said, her voice stronger now, though still faint. "I am the last of my kind, and my species is on the brink of extinction. You are the only hope left for us. Elias frowned, confused. I don't understand. What can I do? I'm not a scientist. I'm not equipped to help you. You don't understand yet, but you will, Lyra replied, her eyes locking onto his. There is a way for you to help me and save my people. The silence in the chamber grew heavy, and Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what she meant, but he knew one thing for sure. His life, and the fate of an entire alien species, had just become forever intertwined. Elias sat beside Lyra, watching her struggle to stay awake. The dim light from his flashlight flickered against the walls of the chamber, casting long shadows across the ancient stone. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. He had found the last of the Cog Alpha, a species once feared across the galaxy, and now she was asking him to help save her people. He couldn't help but wonder if he was in over his head. He had come to Conora for a routine exploration, nothing more. His mission had been to map uncharted territory, not to get tangled in the fate of an extinct alien race. And yet here he was, faced with a task he wasn't prepared for. He had never signed up for anything like this. He was a soldier, not a hero. But Lyra's fragile form, the desperation in her eyes, stirred something deep inside him. She was alone, a lone survivor in a dying world. How could he leave her like this? Elias glanced down at the medkit he had used earlier. It seemed so small compared to the enormity of the situation. His fingers drummed nervously on the surface of the stone, unsure of what to say next. You don't need to do this, Elias said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. There has to be another way. Maybe we can contact Earth. Bring in experts. There's bound to be someone who knows how to save you. Lyra's eyes, which had been closed for a moment, flicked open at his words. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, but there was a fire behind her gaze that Elias hadn't expected. She shook her head slowly. There is no one left, Captain Rain. The war, it took everything from us. Our cities, our knowledge, our people. Only I remain. If you don't help me now, my species will be lost forever. Her voice was full of sadness, but also of a quiet strength, one that made Elias pause. He knew she wasn't asking him out of mere desperation. She was asking him because there was no other choice. Her people were gone, and only a miracle could restore them. And somehow, Elias had become a part of that miracle. I'm not sure how I can help you, Elias admitted. I don't even know what you're asking of me. What do you mean by saving your species? You're the last one. Lyra's hand reached out toward him, her fingers trembling slightly. She grasped his arm, the grip surprisingly strong for someone so weak. Her voice lowered to a whisper. There is a way to restore us, she said slowly, her eyes locking onto his. But it requires more than just science. It requires you, a human. Elias felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had been expecting a lot of things, but not this. He had no idea what she was implying, but the seriousness in her tone made him uneasy. He could feel the weight of her words, and he didn't like where this was going. Me? He repeated, trying to make sense of it. What do you mean by that? Lyra's eyes closed briefly, as if gathering her strength. When she spoke again, her voice was filled with an emotion Elias couldn't place, almost like a mix of hope and fear. My people are biologically unique, she explained, her voice shaky. We cannot survive alone. The Cog-Alpha need a connection, a bond, to reproduce, to create life. And that bond, Captain Rain, can only be formed with a human male. Only through your kind can we restore our species. Elias blinked in disbelief. He had heard stories of strange alien customs, of species requiring unusual methods for reproduction, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. I don't understand, he said, feeling the confusion rise in his chest. Are you saying I need to? What? Breed with you? Lyra nodded, her face showing no shame, only a quiet acceptance of the truth she had to share. Yes, she said softly. You are the only one who can save us. It is the only way." Elias recoiled slightly, his mind struggling to process the information. This was something out of a science fiction novel, something he never thought he would face in real life. He had signed up to be an explorer, not to become part of an alien's desperate attempt to save her species. But then he saw her, Lyra, the last of her kind, staring at him with those sad violet eyes. He couldn't turn away from her. Despite the strange request, there was no malice in her eyes, no trickery. She was asking for help, for a chance to save a species that was about to fade from the galaxy forever. Elias exhaled slowly, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He didn't know what to do. He had come to Conora expecting an adventure, but this was a far cry from anything he had prepared for. He could refuse her, walk away, and report what he'd found. That would be the safe choice. But could he live with himself if he left her here, abandoned, with no one to help her? "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," Elias said finally, his voice low. "I don't know what to do. But I can't just leave you here like this." Lyra gave him a soft, grateful smile. "You don't have to be the right person, Captain Rain. You just need to be the one who is here now. That's all we need." Elias looked down at his hands, trembling slightly. This was the moment of choice. He could walk away and return to his normal life, or he could stay and help her. Knowing the weight of that decision would change everything. As he looked back at Lyra, he knew there was no turning back. He had already made up his mind. The days following Elias's decision felt like a blur. He had never expected to be caught up in something so far beyond his experience, and yet here he was, sitting in a ruined alien city, surrounded by nothing but crumbling stone and the weight of a dying world. Lyra, the last of the Ka'Galtha, had shared her story with him, of the war that wiped out her people, the advanced civilization they had built, and the painful knowledge that she alone remained. Elias knew that he had made a promise, but that promise seemed to grow heavier with every passing hour. Lyra's condition remained fragile. She was weak and needed constant care, yet her spirit never seemed to falter. She remained calm and resolute, as if knowing that time was running out for her and her people. One evening, Elias sat by her side, carefully applying a bandage to a wound she had received during their escape from the ruins. He had become her caretaker, tending to her needs and making sure she was comfortable. Her strange alien biology still fascinated him, and he found himself spending hours trying to understand the advanced technology of the Ka'Galtha that was now at his fingertips. Despite all the challenges, Elias had begun to look forward to their conversations. Lyra, though her body was frail, had an ancient wisdom about her. Her stories about her people's history, their rise to power, and their ultimate downfall were like nothing he had ever heard before. She spoke with such passion, as if she were telling him the story of a beloved family that had been lost forever. "You would have admired the Ka'Galtha," Lyra said one evening, her voice soft but steady as she lay on a bed of soft fabrics. "We were explorers, builders of worlds. We spread across the galaxy, sharing knowledge, peace, and prosperity wherever we went. But our greatest strength was also our greatest weakness, our belief in diplomacy. We trusted too easily, and when our enemies came for us, we were unprepared." Elias listened closely, her words sinking into his mind. He had heard of great empires before, of wars that shaped the galaxy, but this felt different. Lyra's pain was not just that of a lost civilization. It was the pain of a species with so much potential, wiped out in an instant. "But we made mistakes," Lyra continued, her eyes closing slightly, as if remembering the worst moments. "We believed that our technology and wisdom would keep us safe. We didn't realize how dangerous our enemies truly were. They saw our kindness as weakness, and they exploited it. They took everything from us." Elias didn't know how to respond. He felt a deep sadness for her people, but also a growing sense of responsibility. Her story wasn't just one of loss. It was a story of how the Ka'Galtha had thrived, of how they had built something worth preserving. He could see the weight of that legacy in her eyes, and it made him realize just how much was at stake. "I can't bring back your people," Elias said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'll help you. I'll do whatever I can." Lyara's eyes opened, meeting his gaze with a faint smile. "You already have, Captain Rain," she replied softly. "By simply being here, by listening to me, you have already done more than most would have." There was a moment of silence between them. Elias wasn't sure what to say. He was no hero. He had only signed up for this mission because it was part of his job. But now, in this quiet chamber, with the weight of her words and the reality of the situation pressing down on him, Elias knew he couldn't walk away. He had made a promise, and he was going to keep it. "I'll help you with the ritual," Elias said, his voice steady. "I'll do whatever it takes." Lyara's smile grew slightly, and she nodded. "I knew you would, Captain. You're stronger than you realize." The next few days were filled with preparations. Lyra had shared more about the ancient technology of her people, explaining how the ritual would work. There was no going back now. The Kaghaltha's future rested on what Elias was about to do. She had explained to him the intricacies of the process, how their species was bound by a deep biological connection that could only be unlocked through a bond with a human. It was complicated and not without risks, but Elias had made his choice. As the day of the ritual approached, Elias spent more and more time with Lyra, learning about her people, their culture, and the ways in which they had once thrived. He came to understand the depth of her loss, the immense weight of being the last of her kind. It wasn't just about survival for Lyra. It was about honoring the memory of everything that had been lost. But Elias also began to see something else. There was a quiet strength in Lyra, an inner resilience that he admired. Despite everything she had been through, despite the emptiness of her world, she still had hope. She had not given up, and that hope was contagious. It made Elias believe that maybe, just maybe, he could help her save her species. On the morning of the ritual, Elias stood before Lyra, ready to follow through on his promise. The chamber where they had been staying was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. As Lyra prepared for the ritual, she gave him one last look. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere, "for everything." Elias nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Let's do this," he replied, ready to face whatever came next. The chamber was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. Elias stood beside Lyra, who had been preparing for what she called the ritual for the past few days. She had explained it to him in detail, how it was a process tied to the very essence of her people, how it was meant to restore the Kaghaltha, to bring life back to her world. But the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air, making Elias feel unsure. He had always been a man of action, trained to lead and make quick decisions, but nothing about this felt quick or easy. This was not just about exploration or survival. This was about the future of an entire species, a future that now rested in his hands. Lyra lay on the stone slab in the center of the chamber, her body glowing faintly under the soft light from the crystals embedded in the walls. She looked more at peace now than she had in days, but Elias could still see the exhaustion in her eyes. The last of the Kaghaltha was no longer the weak, fragile being he had first met. There was a strength within her, a quiet determination to see this through no matter the cost. "This is it," Elias muttered to himself, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the stone. Lyra's violet eyes opened, and she looked at him with a mixture of hope and calm. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. Elias hesitated, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready," he said, though the uncertainty in his voice didn't go unnoticed. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about the unknown, a leap of faith into a world far beyond his understanding. He stepped forward, kneeling beside her. He could feel his heart racing in his chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation flooding his mind. Lyra had explained everything, but in the end, he still didn't know what to expect. Would it work? Could it really bring life back to her species? Or was he about to make an irreversible mistake? "You must trust me," Lyra whispered, sensing his unease. "This bond is sacred to my people. It is not just physical. It is spiritual. What happens now is beyond science, beyond logic. It is a connection that transcends the boundaries of space and time." Elias nodded, trying to push aside his doubt. There was no turning back. He had promised to help, and this was the only way to do it. He needed to be strong, for both of them. Lyra's soft voice filled the chamber as she spoke an ancient chant, the words unintelligible to Elias, but there was power in them. The energy around them seemed to shift, and Elias felt a strange hum in the air, a vibration deep within his chest. It was like nothing he had ever felt before. The world around him seemed to fade away as he focused on Lyra's words. As the chant grew louder, Elias felt something stir within him, a sense of connection, of something vast and unknown reaching out. He wasn't sure if it was the ritual or his own mind playing tricks on him, but the sensation was unmistakable. Lyra's eyes were now closed, her breathing slow and steady as the energy around them grew more intense. Then, a wave of warmth swept through the room, and Elias felt something he hadn't expected: compassion. It wasn't just about helping her survive anymore. It was about understanding the depth of her loss, the history of her people, and the future they could build together. Elias realized, in that moment, that he wasn't just helping her out of duty. He was part of something much bigger, something that would echo through the ages if it succeeded. Lyra's voice faltered, the chanting becoming softer as her form began to glow brighter, a radiant light surrounding her. "It is working," she said, her voice trembling. "We are connecting. The bond is forming. Do not fear." Elias had no words, no way to explain what was happening. He could feel the warmth of the light surround him, but it wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something that resonated within him. A feeling of unity, of shared purpose, flowed between them. The connection was real. For a moment, Elias felt as though he was no longer on Canora, no longer in this crumbling, forgotten world. Instead, he was floating among the stars, surrounded by an endless expanse of light and energy. He could feel Lyra's presence, her essence merging with his own, their bond growing stronger with each passing second. The light around them began to pulse, growing brighter and brighter until it seemed to consume everything. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded, leaving only the soft glow of the crystals in the walls. The room was silent, the air still. Elias slowly opened his eyes, his heart still pounding in his chest. Lyra lay before him, her eyes closed. But she looked different. Her once weak form now radiated with energy, her breathing steady and calm. For the first time since he had met her, she seemed at peace. Elias leaned closer, his heart still racing. "Lyra," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, and she smiled, a smile filled with warmth and gratitude. "It is done," she said softly. "The bond has been formed. The Codgaltho will live again." Elias felt a rush of relief wash over him. He hadn't known what to expect, but now, looking at Lyra's peaceful face, he knew that the future of her species had been secured. They had done it. He helped her sit up slowly, his hand supporting her back as she adjusted to the new energy flowing within her. "We have done it, Captain Rain," Lyra repeated, her voice filled with quiet joy. "Thank you." Elias smiled, a deep sense of accomplishment settling in his chest. The task had been difficult, but he had fulfilled his promise. The last of the Codgaltho would live on, and he had been part of something truly extraordinary. The days after the ritual were a whirlwind of change. Elias could hardly believe what he had witnessed. It had been nothing short of miraculous. Lyra, once so frail and weak, had become stronger with every passing hour. The energy from the ritual had seemed to course through her, filling her with life, with purpose. And with that energy came a renewed sense of hope. They spent the next few days in the ancient Ka-Galtha ruins, taking advantage of the advanced technology left behind by Lyra's people. She had begun to teach Elias how to use the machines, how to decipher the symbols that were so familiar to her but foreign to him. It was clear that the Ka-Galtha had been far ahead of humanity in many ways, especially when it came to knowledge and science. "Do you understand it now?" Lyra asked one evening, her voice soft, but filled with excitement as Elias stood before a large console, studying the holographic display in front of him. Elias nodded, his eyes still wide with wonder. "I think so. It's incredible. The technology here, it's so advanced. I don't even know where to start." Lyra smiled, her violet eyes sparkling with pride. "It will take time, but I believe you are capable. Your species has the potential to surpass us, if you put your mind to it." Elias chuckled nervously, shaking his head. "I don't know about that, but we can certainly try." There was a moment of silence between them, both of them standing in awe of the strange, alien technology around them. It was as if the whole world was opening up to Elias, revealing its hidden wonders. But as amazing as it was not the technology that weighed on his mind. It was Lyra. She had changed, and Elias couldn't help but notice it. She was no longer the fragile, fearful being who had begged for help just days ago. She was more confident now, more certain of her place in the galaxy. But there was something else, a subtle shift in the way she looked at him. Her eyes no longer held only gratitude. They held something deeper, something that Elias couldn't quite put his finger on. "I've been thinking," Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Now that the bond has been formed, I feel a connection to you, Elias. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced. It's not just the survival of my species, but something more. I can feel your thoughts, your intentions." Elias turned to face her, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra stepped closer to him, her gaze steady and calm. "The bond we created, it's more than physical. It's spiritual, mental. It has linked our minds in ways I didn't expect. I can sense what you're feeling, what you're thinking. You are part of me, Elias. And I feel like I am part of you." Elias swallowed hard, his mind racing to process her words. This was more than he had ever imagined. The bond between them had always been something he had thought of as a necessary means of survival for her species. But now, it seemed as if the bond was changing, evolving into something more profound. Was it possible that this connection, this link between them, was something neither of them could control? I didn't expect this," Elias said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I thought we were doing this to save your people, to restore your species." Lyra nodded, but her expression softened. "And we have done that. But now, Elias, we are connected in a way that no one can undo. My people will be reborn, yes, but this bond is not just about them. It's about us, what we have created together." Elias stood still, taking in her words. He had promised to help her, and he had done that. He had helped restore the Ka-Galtha, given her people a future. But this was something else entirely. He had not been prepared for it. The idea that he and Lyra were now mentally and spiritually linked was a lot to handle. "I don't know what to say," Elias said, his voice quiet. "I didn't expect any of this. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Lyra reached out, placing a hand gently on his arm. "You don't need to say anything. We are in this together now. We will find a way to navigate this bond, to understand it. Together." Elias looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of doubt. But there was none. What he saw was a deep sense of trust, a bond that he had never experienced before. It was both comforting and overwhelming. In the days that followed, Elias and Lyra continued their work. They explored the ruins together, learning more about the Ka-Galtha's advanced technologies and the history of her people. Elias found himself becoming more attached to Lyra, not just as a survivor of an alien race, but as a companion, a partner in the journey that lay ahead. But with every passing day, the connection between them grew stronger, more intimate. It was as though they could communicate without speaking, their thoughts intertwined in ways neither of them had fully understood. It wasn't just the ritual that had brought them together. It was the shared experience, the understanding of what they had been through. The more Elias thought about it, the more he realized that this was not just a mission anymore. This was something personal. He was no longer just a soldier, a scientist, or a hero. He was part of something much greater, something that transcended the boundaries of species and time. And in that moment, Elias knew that whatever the future held, he and Lyra would face it together. Days turned into weeks, and the ruins of Canora became more familiar to Elias. He had been there for what felt like a lifetime. But still, every day was a new challenge. The once quiet planet, now filled with the whispers of the past, had begun to feel like home. He had learned so much in such a short amount of time, not just about the Kagaltha people, but about the strength and resilience that lived within Lyra. But there were still questions, endless questions. Elias felt a gnawing uncertainty in his chest, one that no amount of knowledge or discovery seemed to ease. The bond between him and Lyra was deepening every day, and although it brought them closer, it also complicated things. It wasn't just the language of their connection. He could hear her thoughts and feelings as if they were his own. Her every emotion seemed to resonate within him. And while this bond was a bridge to the future of the Kagaltha, it was also beginning to weigh heavily on Elias. He had never thought about the consequences of his decision. He had only wanted to help her survive, to save her species. But now, it felt like he was tied to her fate in a way he hadn't anticipated. One evening, as the twin moons rose high in the sky, Elias stood outside the temple-like structure that they had made their home. He looked up at the stars, his mind racing. Elias, the soft, familiar voice of Lyra, interrupted his thoughts. He turned to find her standing in the doorway, her figure outlined by the glow of the crystalline walls behind her. Her face was serene, but there was something in her expression that made him pause. She wasn't just looking at him. She was looking through him, as if she could see all the thoughts churning in his mind. "I can feel your thoughts," she said, her voice a mixture of understanding and concern. Elias sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had never been good at hiding his emotions, and the connection between them made it impossible to keep anything from her. "I'm just thinking," he said quietly. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes full of empathy. "About what?" He hesitated. "About us. About the future." Lyra nodded, walking toward him. The bond between them made her steps lighter, as though she moved with the very energy of the planet. She was a living symbol of hope for the Kagaltha, and Elias couldn't help but feel a deep sense of awe and responsibility when he looked at her. "We are connected, Elias," she said softly, her words filled with an unspoken weight. "But this connection is not just about survival. It is about more than that. I have felt it too. I know you fear what lies ahead." Elias clenched his fists, trying to steady the storm of emotions rising within him. "I didn't expect any of this," he admitted. "I thought I was just helping you, just helping your people. But now it's like I'm part of something much bigger. And I don't know if I can handle it. The pressure, the responsibility." Lyra's eyes softened with understanding. "The weight of the future is a heavy burden, Elias, but you do not have to carry it alone. We share it, together. And together, we will find a way forward." The reassurance in her words calmed him, but only for a moment. It was hard to ignore the truth that had been gnawing at him since the ritual. He had bound himself to her, to the Kagaltha, to their survival. He couldn't simply walk away now. "I never asked for this," Elias said, his voice tight. "I was just doing my job. But now, it feels like my whole life has changed. Everything I thought I knew. It's all different." Lyra stepped closer to him, her hand gently resting on his arm. The bond they shared hummed between them, a quiet pulse that felt like the heartbeat of the world itself. "You have always been part of something greater than you know," she said softly. "From the moment you set foot on Kanora, you were part of the Kagaltha's destiny. It was never just about saving me. It was about saving us all. You are not alone in this, and you never will be." Elias swallowed, looking at her. The warmth in her eyes made him feel a little less lost, but the uncertainty remained. The Kagaltha's future wasn't just in his hands. It was in Lyara's too. She had shared so much of her people's history with him, their triumphs, their mistakes. He could see the weight in her eyes. She was not just the last of her kind. She was the hope of an entire civilization. And now, it was his responsibility to help her lead them into the future. "I didn't realize how much I was signing up for," Elias said, his voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "But I want to help. I want to help you build something. I want to make sure your people don't disappear. I don't know where to start." Liara smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "You have already started, Elias. The first step was never about understanding the technology or the rituals. It was about trusting each other. And now we will take the next step, together." Elias took a deep breath, his resolve solidifying. He may have been unsure at first, but he now knew that he could not turn away. Not from Lyra, not from the Kagaltha. He had committed to helping them, and that was a promise he intended to keep. As the twin moons bathed the planet in soft light, Elias felt a new sense of purpose fill him. There was a long road ahead, filled with uncertainty and challenges, but with Lyra by his side, and the bond they shared, Elias knew they could face whatever came next. The sun rose over the ancient ruins of Kanora, its golden light cascading through the broken arches and glimmering on the crystalline structures. Elias stood at the edge of a vast courtyard, gazing at the horizon. The days had stretched into weeks, and in that time, his understanding of the Kagaltha and their legacy had grown deeper. But so had his sense of duty. Behind him, Lyra approached, her steps as silent as the breeze. She carried with her a small, glowing orb, a piece of Kagalthan technology that pulsed with life. It was a symbol of their progress, the first tangible proof that their efforts were working. "Elias," she called softly, her voice carrying the warmth of their bond. He turned, offering her a faint smile. "You've been working on that all night again, haven't you?" Lyra nodded, her violet eyes gleaming. "It's nearly ready. This is the first step toward reviving my people." Elias studied the orb, its light casting gentle patterns on their surroundings. He could feel the energy emanating from it, a blend of science and something almost magical. "It's incredible," he said. "But it's more than just technology, isn't it?" Liara smiled, setting the orb on a pedestal nearby. "You're learning. This is a synthesis of our knowledge, our spirit. The Kagaltha didn't just build machines. We infused them with our essence, our memories, our hopes. This orb holds the genetic blueprint of my people and the cultural archives of our civilization." Elias stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "So this could bring them back? All of them?" Lyara's expression softened. "It's a start, but the process will take time. And it won't be easy." The weight of her words settled on Elias. He had known this journey would be challenging, but now, standing before the very core of their mission, the enormity of it struck him anew. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady. Lyra looked at him, gratitude and determination shining in her eyes. "You've already done so much, Elias, but the bond we share, it's the foundation of this work. Without it, the energy needed to sustain this technology wouldn't exist." Elias nodded, understanding the gravity of his role. "Then we keep going. We do whatever it takes." As they worked together over the next few days, the ruins of Kanora began to transform. With Elias's ingenuity and Lyra's guidance, they activated long-dormant systems, bringing light and life back to the ancient structures. The orb became the centerpiece of their efforts, a beacon of hope that grew brighter with each success. One evening, As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Lyra and Elias sat beside a small fire they had built in the courtyard. The soft crackle of flames filled the air, mingling with the hum of the activated machinery around them. "You've changed, Elias," Lyra said, her voice thoughtful. He raised an eyebrow, glancing at her. "Have I?" Lyra nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "When I first met you, you were guarded, focused on your mission, nothing more. But now, you're different. You've embraced something bigger than yourself." Elias stared into the fire, her words sinking in. "I guess I have. At first, I didn't know what I was getting into. But now, being here, working with you, it's given me a purpose I didn't know I needed." Lyra reached out, placing a hand on his. The bond between them hummed softly, a constant reminder of their connection. "You've become more than just a friend, Elias. You're a part of the Kagaltha now. A part of me." The sincerity in her voice took Elias by surprise. He had felt the bond growing stronger, but hearing her say it out loud made it all the more real. "I feel it too," he admitted. "Like we're not just working together. Like we're connected in a way I can't explain." Lyra smiled, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "The bond is not just about survival. It's about trust, unity, and something deeper. Together, we've begun to rebuild a legacy, and that legacy will carry forward because of us." The next morning, the orb reached full activation. Its light expanded outward, creating a shimmering dome that enveloped the ruins. Within the dome, projections of Kagaltha culture and life appeared, visions of bustling cities, vibrant landscapes, and the people Lyra had once called family. Elias watched in awe as the projections danced around them. It was as if the ruins had come alive, their stories unfolding before his eyes. Lyra stood beside him, tears streaming down her face as she saw glimpses of her past and the hope of her people's future. "It's working," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her. "This is just the beginning, Lyra. We're going to bring them back. All of them." Lyra turned to him, her expression one of unwavering determination. "With you by my side, I believe we can do anything." As the orb's light illuminated the night, casting its glow far and wide, Elias felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had come to Conora as a lone human, but now he was something more. He was a part of Lyra's world, her journey, and her future. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would rebuild. And together, they would ensure that the Kagaltha legacy would never be forgotten.